Lawrence Stroll just watched the Aston Martin dream take its most embarrassing turn yet. Adrian Newey was hired to build a championship machine. Instead, after only 2 races as team principal, he stepped back from the role, because the car was in too much trouble for him to waste time away from the design fight. That is not a normal reshuffle. That is a crisis signal. Aston Martin has 1 point after 7 races. They are last in the Constructors' Championship. The car was reportedly around 4 seconds off the pace, with part of that gap blamed on Honda's power unit and part blamed on Newey's own chassis concept. And now, before Austria, the team is delaying small upgrades for a huge rescue package that may decide whether this entire season was sacrificed or simply wasted. That is why Stroll has every reason to panic. Because money bought the factory, Honda, Newey, and the dream. But it has not bought a working race car. And before the Austrian Grand Prix, one question is hanging over the whole project. Did Newey's shocking decision save Aston Martin's future, or expose that Stroll's billion-dollar plan is already cracking? Subscribe to the channel. Aston Martin should have arrived in Austria looking like a team on the edge of a breakthrough. That was the image Lawrence Stroll spent years building. A new factory. A Works-Honda partnership. Elite recruitment. Fernando Alonso's experience. Lance Stroll's long-term place in the team. And then, the biggest name of all, Adrian Newey. The man who was supposed to turn Aston Martin from an ambitious project into a championship threat. But before the Austrian Grand Prix, the story looks completely different. Because instead of looking like a team rising toward the front, Aston Martin looks like a team trying to stop the entire project from falling apart. And that is why Newey's decision matters so much. He was not just another hire. He was the symbol. The proof that Aston Martin could attract the very best. The statement that Stroll's plan was not just rich, but serious. When Newey joined, the paddock had to pay attention, because this was not a normal technical signing. This was Aston Martin saying, "We are coming for championships." But Formula One has a brutal way of testing ambition. It does not care how expensive the factory is. It does not care how famous the designer is. It does not care how impressive the press release sounds. It only cares about the car. And the AMR26 has exposed the gap between Aston Martin's dream and Aston Martin's reality. That gap is enormous. 1 point after 7 races. Last in the Constructors' Championship. A car reportedly around 4 seconds per lap away from the front. A Honda power unit deficit hurting performance. A chassis and aerodynamic concept also responsible for a painful amount of lost time. And now, the most famous designer in the sport stepping back from team principal duties after only 2 races, because the car needs him somewhere else. That is the part that should worry Stroll most. Because Newey's decision might be logical, but it is also revealing. A stable team does not need to restructure its leadership almost immediately after the season begins. A confident project does not need to pull its greatest technical weapon away from public leadership and back into the design fight this quickly. A car that is basically on target does not force the team to delay small upgrades and wait for a huge rescue package later. This is not business as usual. This is triage. Aston Martin is not polishing a strong car. It is trying to save a broken direction. And for Lawrence Stroll, that creates a nightmare he cannot easily buy his way out of. Because Stroll's entire Formula One project has been built on the belief that enough ambition, enough money, enough infrastructure, and enough elite talent could eventually push Aston Martin into the same conversation as Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren. And for a while, that belief felt possible. The factory gave the team a real base. The Honda deal gave them works team status. Alonso gave them credibility in the cockpit. Newey gave them technical prestige. But now, before Austria, every one of those pillars is under pressure. The factory cannot make the current car fast by itself. Honda's power unit is part of the problem, not the solution yet. Alonso has 1 point, not a title charge. Newey's first Aston Martin concept is under scrutiny. And Stroll is left watching the team sit last, while trying to convince everyone that the real plan is still alive. That is where the panic comes from. Not panic as in chaos with no direction. Panic as in a billionaire owner realizing that the most expensive answers in Formula One do not guarantee the right answer. Because the car itself is failing as a complete package. The power unit is not strong enough. The energy deployment is causing problems. The in-house gearbox has struggled with synchronization. The floor is not producing the downforce expected from simulation. The rear of the car has been unstable. And the whole project started months behind rivals. That last detail is devastating. Newey admitted the AMR26 began about 4 months behind. In Formula One, 4 months is not a delay you casually recover from. 4 months means rival teams were already developing while Aston Martin was catching up. 4 months means less time to validate concepts. Less time to compare simulator predictions with real track data. Less time to identify whether the bold ideas were actually working. And when the car finally reached the track, it did not look like an aggressive concept waiting to be unlocked. It looked like a concept fighting itself. At pre-season testing, the scale of the issue became visible. The car was reportedly multiple seconds off the benchmark Ferrari. The rear was unstable. The energy recovery system had a glitch that caused it to clip out too early before braking zones. The aerodynamic floor was failing to produce the simulated downforce. That is a terrible combination. Because if the engine is weak, you lose on the straights. If the floor is weak, you lose in the corners. If the rear is unstable, the driver cannot trust the car. If energy deployment is inconsistent, the driver cannot build rhythm. If all of that happens together, the team does not have one problem to solve. It has a system problem. And system problems are the hardest to fix because everything affects everything else. A weak power unit can force aerodynamic compromises. Cooling demands can hurt bodywork efficiency. Poor deployment can make the car unpredictable under braking. A gearbox issue can affect drivability. A nervous rear can damage tire life. A driver who cannot trust the car cannot push consistently enough to give perfect feedback. And without clean feedback, the engineers are always chasing shadows. That is what makes Aston Martin's position so dangerous. They are not simply slow. They are uncertain. And uncertainty is deadly when a team is trying to develop a car quickly. That is why delaying upgrades becomes such a controversial decision. On one hand, it makes sense. If the base car is flawed, throwing small parts at it might not solve anything. You could waste time, waste money, and confuse the development path even more. Newey's approach, reportedly focusing on a larger transformational package, could be the disciplined move. But on the other hand, it is a terrifying gamble. Because while Aston Martin waits, the season keeps moving. The standings keep hurting. The team keeps being compared to everyone else. Alonso keeps racing a car that is not giving him what he needs. Lance Stroll remains on 0 points. Honda keeps facing scrutiny. And Lawrence Stroll has to sit through every weekend knowing the big answer is not here yet. That is why the Hungary package has become so important. It is not just an upgrade. It is the proof of the strategy. If the package works, Stroll can say the pain was deliberate. He can say Aston Martin refused to waste time on small improvements because the Real fix required patience. He can say Newey needed focus, Wheatley needed to handle operations, and the project is finally moving into its real phase. But if it does not work, then the story changes completely. Then 2026 was not sacrificed. It was wasted. That is the nightmare. A sacrificed season has purpose. A wasted season has excuses. And right now, Aston Martin is standing dangerously close to the line between the two. This is why Newey stepping back from the team principal role has such a double meaning. Technically, it could be the right decision. Aston Martin needs him focused on the car. They need his attention on the concept, the aero, the package, the development direction, the part of the project where his value is greatest. Team principal duties, with media, politics, personnel management, and daily operational burden, can pull him away from the one thing he was truly hired to do. So stepping back might save the project. But publicly, it looks like a retreat. And in Formula One, perception matters. Rivals see it. Sponsors see it. Staff see it. Drivers see it. The media sees it. And everyone asks the same question. Why did the leadership plan change so quickly? That is exactly why Jonathan Wheatley's arrival matters. Aston Martin needed operational leadership. They needed someone to handle the team principal role properly, while Newey returned to the technical battlefield. Wheatley brings experience from Red Bull, a team that knows what winning structure looks like. But the fact that this change had to happen so soon says something uncomfortable. Aston Martin's original structure may have underestimated the scale of the crisis. They may have imagined Newey could carry a dual role because the car would be competitive enough to manage. But when the car turned out to be deeply flawed, that dual role became a luxury they could no longer afford. That is the kind of realization that makes an owner nervous. Because if the leadership structure had to change, what else was misjudged? Was the car concept too ambitious? Was the Honda integration underestimated? Was the timeline unrealistic? Was the team too far behind before the season even began? Was the expectation of a rapid rise built more on hope than evidence? Those are the questions Stroll cannot ignore. And Austria will not answer all of them, but it will sharpen them. The Red Bull Ring is a dangerous place for Aston Martin's current weaknesses. Honda's engineering leadership has already pointed to cooling and energy management as important factors for the weekend, and the circuit's uphill straights demand strong deployment. If the Honda system is already behind, Austria can make that deficit obvious. If cooling requires compromise, performance can drop further. If the gearbox behaves poorly at low speeds, drivability becomes a problem again. And if the car is still unstable, Alonso and Stroll will feel it immediately. This is not a track where Aston Martin can easily hide behind one lucky sector. The lap is short. The gaps compress. The stopwatch becomes cruel. A small weakness shows up again and again. And for a team already last, that can be brutal. But the biggest pressure may not come from the circuit. It may come from expectation. Because Stroll built a team that is supposed to be judged like a future giant, not a small struggler. That means the criticism hits harder. When a low-budget team is last, people may call it disappointing. When Aston Martin is last after spending this much, hiring this much, and promising this much, people call it failure. That is the burden of ambition. You ask to be taken seriously. Then the sport takes your failure seriously too. And that is why Alonso's role is so important in this crisis. He is reportedly having weekly direct conversations with Newey to shape the team's response. That is not a normal detail. That shows Alonso is more than a driver waiting for upgrades. He is helping hold the technical direction together, using his experience to explain what the car is doing and what it needs. That is valuable. But it is also a sign of how serious things are. Because Alonso should be fighting for positions, not acting as the emotional and technical glue of a project in distress. He has scored Aston Martin's only point of the season. 1 point in Monaco. A circuit that can hide some weaknesses because it is so unusual. But outside that brief moment, the car has left him buried in the standings. And Alonso is not a driver who enjoys wasting years. That creates another layer of Stroll's pressure. He has to keep Alonso believing. He has to convince him that the pain has a purpose. He has to show that the Hungary overhaul is not just another promise. Because if Alonso loses faith, the project loses one of its sharpest minds and one of its strongest public voices. Then there is Lance Stroll. His 0 points are not just a statistic. They are part of the family pressure inside this team. Lawrence Stroll is not simply watching an employee struggle. He is watching his son endure a car that is not competitive, while the entire project is judged publicly. That makes the situation more personal, more complicated, and potentially more emotional. Because a normal owner can separate business from driver performance more cleanly. Stroll cannot do that fully. The team is both a business project and a family project. Every failure hits both. That is another reason the word panic fits the emotional shape of the story, even if the decisions themselves are calculated. The pressure is not abstract. It is personal, financial, reputational, and competitive all at once. That is a dangerous mix. And Formula One has seen this before. Big projects can collapse not because they lack money, but because the money creates expectations faster than the technical structure can deliver. The sport is full of expensive lessons. Facilities matter, but they do not replace understanding. Big names matter, but they do not erase poor integration. Works partnerships matter, but they do not guarantee immediate performance. Aston Martin is learning that in the harshest way. Money can buy the ingredients. It cannot force the recipe to work. And right now, the recipe is wrong. That is why this first block matters so much. Before we even reach the deeper questions about the Hungary B specification car, the Honda deficit, or the long-term 2027 plan, the immediate picture is already alarming. Newey stepped back because his technical focus became more valuable than his team principal title. Wheatley arrived because Aston Martin needed operational structure fast. The team delayed upgrades because the current car may be too flawed for small fixes. Stroll has to defend a strategy that looks like sacrifice while the standings make it look like collapse. And Austria arrives as another public stage where the stopwatch can either give Aston Martin a tiny sign of control or deepen the embarrassment. That is the reality. Aston Martin is not going to Austria to prove it can win. It is going to Austria to prove it still knows how to recover. And for Lawrence Stroll, that may be the most painful part of all. He built this project to chase championships. But before Austria, after Newey's shocking decision, the first battle is much smaller. Convince the world the dream is not already broken.